brother. Mother. It was they who led me to your door.
You've landed on The Substance. I'm your host, Trevor Aiken.
And I'm your other host, Philip Marinello.
We're two guys thinking critically about faith, culture, and theology.
And today, going to be another entry in our Substantive Cinema category. Thanks for checking out our last one, First Reformed. But today, we have a very special guest with us.
Very special.
Brett McCracken of currently Gospel Coalition notoriety. But Brett, why don't you give yourself a little bit of an introduction to our listeners who might not be familiar with you?
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. So, I'm Brett McCracken. I am a writer. I'm currently the senior editor for the Gospel Coalition, where I focus on arts and culture content. So things that you might see on the Gospel Coalition's website related to movies, TV, music, the arts, that falls within my domain. So it's kind of a dream job for me because I love writing, I love editing, I love the conversation about theology in the arts. So that's kind of been the area or kind of my niche as a journalist, as a writer. I'll just give you a quick background. I went to Wheaton College for undergrad, started writing film reviews for the student newspaper back then. So this was like early 2000s. So
wow.
I think the first movie review I ever wrote was the movie O with Josh Hartnett. It's like a modern day version of Othello. Forgettable movie, but that was the first movie review that I ever published for the Wheaton College Record. So that's where I got my start. I started writing for Relevant magazine around those early years when I was in college, because Relevant was just starting and they needed some content and they didn't pay, but that was fine. It was exposure. So I kind of had the benefit of being in the early days with Relevant, and they published pretty much any review that I sent them. From there, I got connected with Christianity Today. They brought me on as a regular film critic contributor, and I wrote for Christianity Today for, probably 10 years as just a freelance contributor. But that really, I think, was a place where I could hone my craft as a critic and really go deep with theological engagement with films in serious ways that go beyond the curse counting or worldview analysis approaches that so often.
Curse counting.
Which, we definitely, that's a hard thing to find, healthy film criticism that is, in a way, given to the church to kind of present things in that manner that isn't just, we should or shouldn't see this movie because it's got this or that amount of like naughty content.
A weird job description. Right. F-word tallier.
I know, right? But sadly, that was the dominant approach for, most of my childhood. Whenever I would read Plugged In or some of those Christian publications that looked at movies, so much of it was about that kind of what's the violence, what's the sex, what's the nudity, what's the curse count, which is fine, and there's a place for that, and we can talk about that later, perhaps. But I just wanted to go deeper than that, and not just dismissing that approach completely, but just I felt like there's more to this conversation. There's more resonance with faith and with theology and art and cinema than we often are seeing and exploring. So that's kind of what I've set about to do as a writer and as a critic. And I've been fortunate to have opportunities to do that, and I went to grad school at UCLA. I got a master's degree in cinema and media studies, so that was a great experience to just, really focus on film theory and history and from kind of secular perspectives, but bringing my Christian identity to the table as well. And that program is one of the best critical studies programs anywhere in film. It's where Paul Schrader studied, the director of First Reformed. He went through that program way back in the day. So it was cool to go through that program, and I feel like I really I matured as a thinker and as a writer in grad school. And then the last couple of years, I've been writing more for the Gospel Coalition, and they hired me full-time about a year and a half ago. So that's the journey.
Wow.
So far.
It's an awesome journey. So where in that journey does Terrence Malick and the film Tree of Life come in?
Let's start with Terrence Malick.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised I didn't bring that up in my first go-through of my story, because he does figure prominently in my journey as a thinker and as a writer. I would say Terrence Malick, and this is, not overstating it, he's the reason why I am doing what I'm doing in terms of looking at the intersection of faith and theology in the arts. It was The Thin Red Line, his 1998 World War II movie, that really convinced me to want to become a film critic, to want to start writing about movies with a specific eye towards where kind of faith and spirituality intersected with Hollywood films. I saw The Thin Red Line as a high school sophomore. You guys probably know the theater. It was in Shawnee, the West Glen Theater, right off 435.
Is that the Glenwood Arts Theater?
No, it's off of Renner Road. And
okay, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I don't think it's called West Glen anymore, but anyway, that's beside the point. That's where I kind of saw all of my movies growing up.
Nice.
But I remember going to see The Thin Red Line as a high school sophomore, and it was just a transformative movie-going experience for me, because it was the first time that I felt like I was in church, kind of, like while I was in the theater. You know, that feeling where there's just a feeling of transcendence, and I don't know, you can't quite put your finger on it, but if it was the first time where I felt like, wow, this movies have a unique capacity to articulate spiritual longing and kind of give visceral expression to that. So it was just a life-changing movie for me. I had never heard of Terrence Malick before that, so.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did you have any idea what you were getting into when you purchased your ticket
No.
for Thin Red Line?
I had no idea that it would become kind of such a big deal for me. But yeah, I went on to watch his previous two films, Badlands and Days of Heaven. So for those who don't know, Terrence Malick,
That's me.
he made two films in the 70s. Badlands first in 1972 with Sissy Spacek and Martin Sheen, and then Days of Heaven with Richard Gere in 1978. And both of those films were critically acclaimed, award-winning, and it really put Terrence Malick on the map and kind of part of this 1970s, American cinematic moment where so many great films were coming out. Now, he disappeared after that. So after Days of Heaven in 1978, he kind of famously disappeared from Hollywood and was absent for 20 years. No one, to this day, no one knows exactly what he was doing, where he was. I think he lived in France for part of that 20 years. And he has always been a recluse and kind of shy of press. He doesn't do interviews. He doesn't appear, at film premieres, any of that.
Yeah, I think there's that one picture of him that is like everywhere, and that's all you kind of really have of him.
Right. There's like 5 photos that, are only glimpses of Terrence Malick, although in recent years he's, I think, become less shy, perhaps a little bit. But anyway, yeah, so he came back onto the scene just out of nowhere in the late 90s with The Thin Red Line, which was a movie that, like, seemingly every actor in Hollywood was in. Like, if you go back and watch it, it's like who's who of late 90s Hollywood stars. George Clooney and John Travolta and Sean Penn, Nick Nolte.
I always forget
Adrian
Travolta's
Brody.
in the movie whenever I watch
Yeah,
it.
it's crazy. So anyway, we could talk about so many of Terrence Malick's movies, but we're here to talk about The Tree of Life. So
The one I've seen. Yay.
the one you've seen. Have you not seen any of the others, Trevor?
I am not I'm not very well versed in film in general, so no, I haven't. I don't think I've seen any of his other films.
So we've talked about it on a few of the shows recorded. I think I'm probably responsible for like
90%.
80+% of his film collection and film viewing.
This is true.
Nice. Well, you got your work cut out for you with Malick.
There I go. Yeah.
Yeah. So Trevor, that's a really good intro background. Actually,
Yeah,
kind of
thanks,
before
bro.
that, so I remember in the lead up to Tree of Life, I can't remember if it was Relevant or Christianity Today, but I was aware of your writing on the Thin Red Line. I think maybe if I'm getting it right, the Thin Red Line Criterion collection was announced somewhere around the Tree of Life coming out, and there was like build up because it had won the Palme d'Or, and there was a whole lot of like Terrence Malick's first movie in like almost 10 years again. So
Right.
there was a lot of anticipation when I saw it, and I was telling Trevor off air, I forget about this every now and then, but I was in Florida when I saw it at the Tampa Theater. It's an old art house theater, like an old stage that's converted into a movie theater. And the only time in my film going life I've seen a big sign posted at the box office of this art house theater where it's pretty much just cinephiles and elderly
Right.
people who are art patrons anyway.
Right,
But there's a
right.
big sign saying, if you don't like
Refund.
the Tree of Life, your money will not be refunded.
Yeah,
I was
right.
like, wow, what am I getting into here?
That was a famous part of the Tree of Life story, was that it set records for walkouts, like mid movie walkouts, which
Probably
funny.
around
hilarious.
the creation of the cosmos, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it was probably around that point of the movie, which
Because you're kind of roped in for the first 40 minutes. It's still kind of
Right.
chopped up, but there is still a
Right.
sense of like, okay, this is a family drama, sort of kind of like, I have
right.
a lexicon for this. And then it's like,
No,
all right,
you
let's
don't.
go back to the beginning.
Right.
Let's start this story at the beginning.
Okay, so I don't want to get too far ahead of us.
Let's start our story at the
So
beginning.
let's start it. So Trevor,
Yeah.
as somebody who, like, as you admitted on the 2018 Meter Roundup, you saw probably 2 movies in the theater all year.
That's correct. Wreck-It Ralph and Black Panther.
2 enjoyable
Nice.
films in their own right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I took my 2-year-old to her first film. It was fun.
That's fun.
So first impressions, like, how would you describe it? What were your thoughts as
Yeah.
somebody who is
Mhm.
probably the average type moviegoer, maybe a little bit less, but you're a pretty average film goer. What were your
Yeah.
thoughts going into it?
So, how would I describe the film?
Yeah.
So imagine, listener, if you would, you want to tell a story about a person's life, but you want to view it through the context of the entire history of the universe. And that be the context for their struggle of faith and pain and meaning. That's what the Tree of Life is, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad. I always try to be as basic as possible because, man, it's a challenging one. I basically say throw everything you know about like traditional film out. Like it's not a narrative.
Yeah.
Like it is poetry. It is cinematic poetry.
That was helpful to me.
That has themes of like, I mean, it's in the title, but basically it's trying to encapsulate the experiences of life, the ups and the downs, like it in as much as
Right.
possible. I feel like his goal was trying to encapsulate the entirety of life in a film.
Brett, if you had a summary, what would you go with?
Yeah, I mean, I usually say like the shortest description I give is it's about the birth and death of the universe and a Texas family in between. You know,
Yeah.
it's both the macro and the micro. It's about everything. It really is.
It's about everything.
It is.
It's a movie about everything.
It's pretentious to say that, but it really is. Like, no film I've ever seen has come closer to capturing everything. Like, it's about pain and suffering and joy and aging and time and beauty and death and life and everything in between. I think he does an amazing job of capturing these kind of tableau moments, these vignette moments that are sometimes as quick as like a one shot, like a mom lifting her wet foot off of wet grass that the sprinklers have. Like, there's something about the way he can capture a shot or a moment that like instantly brings to mind resonances of life and existence that so many of us can relate to. So, I think it's not, overstating it to say it's about everything.
100%. So
I would just say stylistically, the way I describe all of Terrence Malick's films, especially recently, is a kind of cinematic impressionism. So if you know, impressionism in painting, like Monet and Van Gogh, etc., what that was to painting, Terrence Malick is doing to cinema. He's taking tons of little bits and pieces, flashes of this, flashes of that, brush strokes of this, brush strokes of that. And, up close, it maybe looks incomprehensible and it looks blurry, but taken from the long view, it makes beautiful sense, and in a way that a more straightforward narrative couldn't capture. So the way that he puts things together out of order and kind of in elliptical editing, whatnot, is frustrating because it's so unconventional. It's so different from how we usually process movie images. But I think it creates this kind of cinematic impressionism that's so unique and powerful in a really unique way.
Yeah. That is kind of how I experienced it too, is like, he's just like, it's just these symbols almost. And you can almost read what's happening in the film by like reading your own emotional responses to these symbols in the film. Like, you see this kid who sees this dog barking, and then he's starting to address these ideas of fear, like right afterwards. And so you can start to think like, oh, like
I felt fear. I can relate.
Yeah, I felt fear. And then he starts addressing fear. So you kind of can see and read where the film's going by almost just being in tune with your own even emotional response to these symbols or impressions. Right. I like that term as he's going through.
Yeah. What I love about that, what you just said, is I think the best movies are the ones that invite the viewer to have to do some work to read into it. And, it's a more active, engaging type of cinema where everyone watches The Tree of Life and probably has a different experience because different moments, different symbols, different scenes kind of capture them and connect with them in different ways. So, for me, someone who grew up in the Midwest, there's a whole layer in which that aspect of the film connected with me. Like Terrence Malick's childhood in Texas in the 50s had similarities to my childhood in Oklahoma and Kansas, in the 80s and 90s, that someone who grew up in, London wouldn't be able to relate to. And yet they might relate to the film on a different level, and there might be things in it that they see. So it's a masterpiece in that regard because everyone who watches it, I think, can get something out of it, and there isn't one interpretation that's the objective final interpretation. And that's the power of images. Images are subjective to some extent. I mean, there's an objective quality to an image because it captures a thing in a certain time and place, but there's a subjective quality to it too, which is the symbolic level of what it means. What is an image of a butterfly at a certain moment in the movie? What does it mean? Well, that's the level at which multiple people can have different ideas.
That's true.
Which I think is key with what you said with I definitely heard about a lot of people that I tried to show it to back in college. Not a fan. I think that's part of it where you said it requires engagement. And if we're no offense to blockbusters, there are some blockbusters out there that have things to say. But if you're used to going to be like highly stimulated and highly entertained and to be spoon fed, you're out of shape.
Yeah.
Most people don't go to the movies to exercise their mind and their heart and their emotions. They go to like be thrilled for an hour and a half.
Or like it's not the movie you just throw on at the home theater when you're with your buds goofing around or something on a Friday night.
Right. I know. I always, whenever I show Terrence Malick movies to people at my house, I always like make a big caveat at the beginning. We are not going to stop this movie for any breaks. There's going to be no cell phone. You need to give this movie your full attention, like you would give a sermon in church your full attention, because it's that type of movie. Like it engages you in a much more active rather than passive way, which is hard, as you said, for people who are used to the movies doing it for you and just sitting back and enjoying explosions and whatever fight scenes.
So kind of along that line, you're a professional critic. You've been in the film criticism space for over a decade. How would you address like somebody who's not used to exercising it? They see it and it's atypical narrative structure. They see he's all over the place. It's not even not linear, because Chris Nolan's a pretty mainstream filmmaker, even though he's got a lot of high concepts. So they might be a little bit okay with nonlinear, but just impressionistic, abstract. And they go, well, that's just pretentious. How would you navigate and help somebody discern between pretentious and ambitious?
Yeah, I think I would start by just challenging them to see movies as an art form, which I don't think a lot of people often do. You know, we think of going to art museum like the Nelson Atkins Art Museum in Kansas City. We think of that in a different vein, a different category than we do thinking about going to an AMC megaplex. Sure. But I would say, I would just
the concessions are cheaper at Nelson Atkins.
You're not wrong.
That's true. That's true. You know, I would just challenge people, like, you know, a film can be an art form just as much as a painting in the Nelson can be. It's just a matter of framing your mindset so that you can go into it that way. And just like you would, you know, look at a painting that was difficult and actually, you know, sit for a while, hopefully, and make an attempt to understand it. I would hope that we could do that with a film like this that is more in the vein of a painting and kind of that level of high art than it is a, you know, Michael Bay Transformers movie. It's just so different from that 100%. Type of cinema. And
that's so clearly Malick's intent. Like, he's not trying to pound his fist and be like didactic. He is trying to evoke a response. And especially, I feel like with Tree of Life, he is trying to give you enough space to kind of have an experience.
There's a real economy of words in Tree of Life, too.
Shoot, I mean, the actual, I'd be interested to see what the actual word count was. Is that something that you've kind of looked at in all of your analysis?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the geniuses about a good filmmaker is the economy of words and showing rather than telling, and being able to capture something profound just in, you know, a 5-second camera movement or shot, which I feel like Terrence Malick is a master at.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't hurt to have Emmanuel Lubezki as well. I mean, those are two of some of like the top guys at the top of their form.
Who's
like
that?
Writer, director, the photographer. Cinematographer.
Nice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I mean, like the camera movement and the music do like most of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Malick employs like all of the sensory tools that he has at his disposal. Sound and music are huge in his movies, and they have been since the beginning. Badlands, like he uses classical music and just music generally in a way that is really unparalleled among filmmakers. And it has its own language and its own level of meaning. Like in The Tree of Life, I wrote about this in my most recent article about The Tree of Life, the extended version. But I have a whole section on music, and the way that he frames the movie with these kind of pieces of sacred requiem like pieces. So Taverner's Requiem opens the movie, and then Berlioz's Requiem ends the film. And so
it opens up with scripture and sacred music.
Yeah,
that's not an average blockbuster.
Not the average film. No, it opens and closes with sacred choral music, orchestral music, that the Latin words of the final Berlioz piece that plays in the last 10 minutes of the movie is literally like Christian liturgy, like, Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, grant us everlasting peace. So it's just like it's a layer that, oftentimes we notice in movies, like, oh, that music was great, the score was great. But in Malick's work, it's actually communicating profound truths that you can't really understand the movie apart from. So that's another level where, like, if you dig into it, you like Google, like, what was that song? Like, what's the context of that song? What do the lyrics mean? It unlocks a whole nother meaning to the film in a really cool way.
It's so his music isn't just background music, it's part of the story itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, and that's what I think some people critique Malick's films sometimes as being like just too pretty, like it's just excessively beautiful. Sometimes people say things like, oh, it's just like an extended like perfume ad. Like,
I haven't seen his most recent two, but I have heard those criticisms.
That's hilarious.
Right. It's just like people prancing around on beaches and in fields at sunset with orchestral music. And I'm just like, it frustrates me because if you do the extra work of finding out what is the actual song that's playing and why, it makes so much more sense. It's not just about something pleasant to listen to or look at.
Right.
I kind of wanted to get with the two main themes, but something you said a little while ago. This is just an aside, and because since I have you on the phone and as a student of Malick, the first several times, Badlands is probably my least favorite and or the most challenging Malick to me personally. So it's probably the one I've spent the least time with. But I've seen it more, or I've thought about it more since the last time I saw Tree of Life, and then when I watched it with Trevor, and like I felt like Badlands and the vibes bled a lot more through. Like I got a lot of similarities and overlap. Like I just got a lot more Badlands vibes than I ever did, and I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that and the similar themes in his movies and kind of the overlap and just him communicating his own experience.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think in all of his films, he's exploring this kind of arc of paradise, and then paradise lost, and then paradise regained. It's kind of this Eden moment. Like a lot of his films start with this kind of idyllic Eden type environment. The Thin Red Line, for example, like there's this kind of paradise, tropical paradise that bookends the movie. And then, of course, it goes to like the worst, bloody war experience. And Badlands is similar. It's kind of this naive pair of young people that are in this kind of Eden-like reality, and then sin enters, and suddenly innocence is lost, and the beauty of the world is tarnished, and there's this kind of awareness, this sudden kind of almost like Adam and Eve's awareness of their nakedness in the Bible. I think Malick's films all have moments like that. So in The Tree of Life, when Jack, the central character, the boy, he goes through this extended sequence of discovering his depravity and sin, and he's all of a sudden aware of death and his own temptations. And it's this kind of knowing awareness, this knowledge of good and evil. So the movie is bookended with the Tree of Life, just like the Bible is, this symbol of shalom and God's presence and everything as it was meant to be. But then, in the middle of the movie, in between these bookends of the two trees of life, is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the awareness of sin, the awareness of our fallenness. And the movie is kind of this desire to recover that innocence. At various points in the movie, Jack says says it explicitly. He's like, how do I get back there? How do I get back to that place of innocence? And I think variations on that sentiment are expressed by all of the characters in Malick's films, from Badlands to Days of Heaven to The Thin Red Line. You'll hear that type of voiceover a lot. How do we get back to what we had before we lost it? You know, in The Thin Red Line, Jim Caviezel's character is constantly saying things like, you know, where did this come from? This evil, that we see in this war. You know, how do we get back to that place of innocence? So I could go on and on, but I think that's the big theme that Malick is exploring, and it's encapsulated in the Tree of Life, you know, most directly because the name itself tips us off to the fact that, you know, he's looking back to Eden and what happened, and it was sin, and it was, you know, fallenness, and then, but eventually there's hope. There's hope for restoration. And I think all of Malick's films end on a note of hope, even if they spend most of their time, you know, in that place of sin and tension and awareness of depravity. So it's a really beautiful coherence, I think, when you look at all of Malick's films. They all kind of have that, like the New World. I mean, it's the name itself, the New World, kind of hints at this longing, this longing for paradise found again, for a new start, a fresh start, which we all, I think, are looking for. How do we get back to that paradise that was lost? So yeah, there's Trevor, this is why you need to watch all of Malick's films now, because you'll see all these
which
connections.
We can do.
Yeah, somehow we'll get time to do that eventually.
Well, we have a podcast where we talk about film. We could.
Boom.
That'll be interesting. So I mean, the most obvious kind of through lines that we can grab onto, stated at the very beginning of the film, are kind of the two classic options that he gives forth as like the paths through life, like the way of nature that pleases self, and the way of grace that pursues like the good of the other.
Right.
Because again, like you said, it's about everything through the lens of a family, which again, if you're going to try to talk about the highest realities and complexities, they have to be told through the life of a human. Like that's the way God designed it. Like right and wrong aren't just abstracts. Right and wrong are right and wrong because they interact with the real.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess one thing that we could look at is like the way it's portrayed through the parents.
Right.
So Brad Pitt is the classic, the self-made man, and Jessica Chastain is the nurturing, loving, giving one.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, you see that struggle within Jack. Like he's got his mom and his dad in him, and he's trying to figure out which way to go.
Yeah. I don't think the movie lands. Like, I don't think it, I mean, you could, a simplistic reading of the movie would be to say, you know, the mom, you know, the way of grace is where the movie lands. But I don't know that it's that simple. I think Jack talks about how, like, always my parents are wrestling inside of me, nature and grace. And I think in the end, we need both in terms of the disciplinarian father. So the nature is represented by Brad Pitt, and he's kind of this tough, hard father figure. But he also brings something to Jack that his mom doesn't, which is rules and boundaries and a sense of a type of love that isn't just a free-for-all. And his mom, you know, interestingly, there's the sequence where his dad goes off on a business trip around the world, and during that time is where it's where Jack descends into sin the most. It's when the boys act up. It's when his depravity journey begins, when his father's gone. And so I think the film is suggesting that we need kind of both, and the two interact in a way that brings life. And Malick maybe is even suggesting that in some archetypical kind of Jungian way, like the nuclear family of a father and a mother represent kind of this system, this way that brings flourishing to us. Because we don't flourish when it's just complete freedom. We don't flourish when there's no grace at all either. But I don't think the film is pitting them against each other either. Like they intertwine in a mutually edifying way. So anyway, that whole part of the film I'm still learning about it, and I don't know that I've landed on what I think Malick is trying to say about the nature and grace thing, but it's interesting.
Yeah. One of the things that stood out to me is this role of Jack's brother, which kind of seems to get brought up early and then almost is there as bookends as well. How important is that in kind of guiding the film's, I don't know, crisis and resolution, if you could call it those things?
The brother character is interesting. The first line of the film is brother, mother, it was they that led me to your door. So it's kind of Sean Penn saying those words. So Jack is reflecting on his journey of faith. I think that's meant to be a prayer. He's kind of talking to God and saying, it was my mother and my brother that led me back to you, that kind of led me to recover my faith. And so you can see easily how the mother character played that role, but I think it's fascinating to look at the film in terms of the brother question. And, obviously the brother dies, and so there's this kind of launching this journey of grief that I think his brother is the cause of when his brother dies. I think for both his mom and for Jack, it leads them to that question that plagues so many people, which is the problem of evil, the problem of suffering. Why would such a bad thing happen to such a good boy? Like, how could God allow this? And that's why the book of Job figures so prominently in the film, because that's the question that Job asks, why God? Why do you allow these things? And so I think the brother dying at a young age, I think he was 18 or something, launches Jack on this journey of maybe losing his faith for a while and questioning God, but then maybe seeing his mother keep her faith in spite of this grief, in spite of losing her son. And so the mother at the end of the film, her last words are, I give him to you, I give you my son. There's this sense of her, she's able to come to terms with this, God, I don't know why you took him, but I'm giving him to you, I'm releasing him to you, and I'm still worshiping you. Her posture in the final scene of the movie is worship. She's got her hands lifted, the music you hear is worship. And I think from Jack's perspective, watching his mom go through that grief and emerge still in a place of faith and trust in God's goodness is for him a crucial thing. So interestingly, and I go into this in more depth in my recent article on the Tree of Life, but the character of his brother, I think, and I don't like talking about Christ figures usually in movies because I think that's
a lot of people like to read Christ into everything.
Everything, yeah. I think it's overdone in Christian film criticism, and you really won't see me do this very often, but I actually think that Malick kind of, in some sense, sees his brother's character as evoking Christ. If you watch the film closely, there's shots of his brother that, the movie is talking about light, and the brother is seen holding a lamp and with the light of the world, and then his name is RL.
Oh yeah, I was going back over your article. I hadn't even considered that at all.
RL?
Yeah, his name is RL, which maybe means resurrection and life. I don't know. I did research into what Malick's brother's name actually was, and it wasn't RL. So he came up with that name for some reason. No, Malick being Malick, it wasn't just a random name. So anyway, I think there's something going on with that character that is meant to kind of evoke Christ. And then some people have read the mom character as a sort of Mary figure. But, I don't know about that. But that's how I see the mom and the brother kind of playing a role in Jack's journey.
Yeah, if so, then you would have brother and mother at the beginning of the film in a Catholic kind of way, Jesus and Mary.
Yeah. I mean, that's, some people, I think, see the film as Catholic for that reason, but I don't. I think it's Malick himself is not Catholic, and I think the movie is more of a Protestant vision of faith.
And I feel like it's hard to deny. You can't say that, again, it's not polemic. It's not trying to like be like, here are my positions, like here are the propositions.
Yeah.
Here's my systematic
truth.
theology.
Yeah.
Like here are my like theological propositions. Again, it's a film that is trying to evoke thoughts and feelings and meanings, but there's a lot of films, like you said, there's a lot of film critics out there that try to impress like Jesus and the gospel and various things into movies where it's at in a very nice way, it's a stretch.
It's taking the Emmaus Road to Hollywood.
Yeah. But this is it's absolutely made for that. I can't say, because I mean, again, because of the nature of Malick, it's hard to pin down exactly what the authorial intent, so to speak, is, but like in the Tree of Life especially, it's undeniable.
Right. Well, I mean, everything in the movie is just soaking with biblical references and allusions, and everything from snakes that like slither by the mom's feet, and when there's like words about evil and sin. And yeah, there's just so much of that throughout the film. And yeah, the title itself, the music, everything just tips us off that this is a Christian piece of art. This is a piece of sacred Christian liturgy in a cinematic form. That's not to say that a non-Christian can't watch it and get a lot out of it and connect with it. But I think you can't say that this movie is like a Buddhist film or like,
that's true, absolutely. For me, it's so incredible to see somebody on the level of Malick. We're going to do our best not to try to like just dunk on quote unquote like Christian movies, but like the fact of the matter is for the very, very most part, they are not done with any sort of high level of excellence for the very most part.
Right.
Well, and I don't know if when people go and set out to make a Christian film,
if you set out to make a Christian
in that
film,
industry, that like
it's not
they're not necessarily trying to make an art piece so much as a statement or something that
those are polemic. Those are exactly like here's my position, and my goal is at the end to like
which is also in the title of the movie three times
to manipulate your emotions enough to that like you agree.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, we could talk all day about the whole Christian film problem and conversation.
Invite you back
arguably First Reformed is a Christian film, Paul Schrader's film, like, and yet like First Reformed and the Tree of Life are so different. They could not
and made
be
by very different men too.
They're very different men. So I think that there's no one kind of category or genre of Christian cinema, Christian films, as much as like we associate the term Christian movie with like God's Not Dead or Fireproof or something like that. I think that we should broaden that category to think about the types of films that like Malick is making and others.
Well, so my original point with that, like Malick is such a strong filmmaker, and this is such a, like you said, a worship film and like a Godward film, if you will. Like it's I forgot the word you said.
Liturgical.
Yeah. I think back to Roger Ebert's writing on it, and before he passed away, somebody like him whose life was film and film criticism, calling it like, as somebody who was nominally Catholic and lapsed and had his own issues, how it stopped him. Mm-hmm. Basically, like he felt like a form of prayer, and not like watching a film like that will change you, but like watching a film like that will set your mind and your heart. It will point you towards the ultimate questions. Like you said, it's about everything.
Yeah, I think it's a great film actually for seekers. So like, I think we have to be careful with like treating art in utilitarian way where it's like we're using art to kind of evangelize or whatever. But I do think movies can be uniquely powerful conversation starters with non-believers, with people who are spiritually wandering and looking for answers and maybe sensitive to the transcendent, even if they wouldn't call it that. And I think a film like The Tree of Life, which a secular atheist, non-believing person would maybe be interested in seeing, because it's Terrence Malick and it's Brad Pitt and it's a beautiful award-winning film. But yeah, like you can't watch that film and be left with nothing in your soul stirred, or at least, some questions about life and God and suffering and all of that pricked a little bit in your mind. And that is an amazing thing that I don't think God's Not Dead is going to do. I don't think a lot of like LA, New York hipsters are going to rush out to see God's Not Dead with their Christian friends and have conversations about it.
We've talked about it before, kind of offhandedly, but I think the biggest problem with that, which is kind of ironic, you have a man like Paul Schrader whose career in a lot of ways is impressive, but when you look at his positions and his character, you're like, he might not be the guy you would look to for spiritual advice. But in First Reformed, his goal was to honestly deal with hard things in the world, the transcendental, like in an honest way as much as possible, and not in a teaching way.
Right, and in a way that is accessible to skeptics. I think someone who watches The Tree of Life, who has questions about God and who struggles with the problem of evil and the problem of suffering, like they watch that movie and they feel understood, and they feel like, Malick gets it. Like, this is a real problem. And, just like Sean Penn's character, Jack, the character of Jack, is having a faith crisis and trying to recover his faith. Like, that's the journey of so many people in this world. So I love that. And I wish we had more films like that took seriously the human dilemmas that we have with questioning God and faith, and yet not being completely closed off to the transcendent and the realities of spirituality.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, like taking something seriously and genuinely and not trying to give prepackaged Sunday school answers to people who already agree with you. Something like you said, I saw the first God's Not Dead. I'm not necessarily planning on watching 2 and 3, but like somebody that had hard questions is not going to come to that and feel like they're taken seriously, like they're painted in broad strokes as the bad guy that gets defeated by faith at the end. Like, that's not a way to genuinely interact with deep, important themes.
Right. Well, and the Bible itself, takes it seriously. So the book of Job, like, it takes seriously these hard questions, and, Ecclesiastes, like, it's right there in the Bible. And I feel like we haven't sufficiently availed ourselves of those biblical resources in our filmmaking and our art making as Christians, because if we would just, make an amazing Ecclesiastes movie, we would be able to connect with so many people, because that's the experience of life for so many people. But instead, I think.
And would you say that's kind of what he was going for with the last 2 films? I'm familiar with him, but I haven't seen them yet.
Yeah, I think his last 2 films, Knight of Cups and Song to Song, are just like directly evoking biblical wisdom literature. So Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. So the very title, Song to Song, is, I think, a reference to Song of Songs, the biblical book. And so I wrote an article for Christianity Today about that film and Song of Solomon. But yeah, I think Malick, just like The Tree of Life draws upon Job, I think a lot of his films really do look to the Bible as inspiration, just in ways that we haven't seen done in film before. So that's why it's hard for us to register it sometimes. But I wish we had more examples.
Just the fact that they're challenging, like you said, some people walk out, or some people who aren't used to it, they just shut it down and throw it out as pretentious. Like, he doesn't make it easy, because life isn't easy. Like, again, he's dealing with like the most high metaphysical like questions that people have.
Right. He's a filmmaker who respects his audience in terms of, meeting them in their own wandering. So the character of Jack, Sean Penn's character, literally is wandering in the desert in the film. And I think the Tree of Life is a great film for people who feel like that, who feel like they're kind of wandering in a spiritual desert and trying to make sense of it. So yeah, I mean, for people who are in that place, who are open-minded, I think Malick's films have a lot to offer.
Well, I think that covers a lot of the big themes. One of the things I wanted to ask you while we're still kind of circling some of these things is what you said the most recent version of the film you watched was the extended cut that was roughly 50 minutes longer.
Wow.
Yeah, a good old was like 310, 320. What do you think that
Trevor's
added?
like, I don't know if I want to watch that long of the version.
I need more hours in my day.
Right. I know. It's a commitment for sure. But yeah, I mean, I loved it. I think it adds so much to the movie. I think it fills out a lot of the characters, and there's new dimensions to some of the characters that come through with the extended version. And I mean,
Sean Penn's like grown-up
sequences.
Jack is a lot more of the focus, if I understand. Is that correct?
There's definitely like a new, like probably 5-minute sequence early in the film that shows more of his character, but a lot of the additional footage is just kind of added periodically throughout the film. So the whole sequence of Jack's like childhood rebellion and his like fall, coming to terms with his sin, that is really expanded. Like it's like Malick really wanted to hammer that home and show the audience that experience of rebellion and being kicked out of the garden, so to speak. So yeah, the extended version I think adds a lot of that material. There's like a tornado sequence that is another kind of Job reference where a tornado hits their town, and it's another opportunity for Jack and his brothers to kind of ponder
like the whirlwind. Interesting.
The whirlwind, yeah, like God, why did you bring this destruction? Just like they ponder, like, why did you let our friend die, the little boy who dies in the pool? So there's more of that kind of pondering, that Job pondering to God, why did you do this? Why did you let this happen? It's worth watching. It's definitely a commitment. So if I were showing the film to someone for the first time, I would probably actually go with the extended version. I think it's a more complete vision that underscores the Christian nature of the movie in ways that are even more unmistakable than the theatrical version was.
Yeah, I'm so grateful like we live in the day we live in where a movie can come out like that and incredible, and then it can be like, well, this is my actual full complete vision that there's no way a studio would let me release into theaters. You think people walked out to like the 2-hour 10-minute one, like nobody's staying for that.
Yeah, I don't think that they would make much money if they took the theatrical version to theater, or took the extended version to theaters. Maybe they would in New York and LA with cinephile audiences, but your average film goer probably doesn't have much of a threshold for 3 hours of Malick at his most Malicky.
That's kind of what I was going to ask you about too. So where would you put this, if you want to be so crudely as to say like ranking, but like where does this fit in Malick's body of work? What is this? Is this like pinnacle peak Malick? Because he still has stuff to say afterward, and he's like you said, the history. One of the big things that was impressive to me was like after the New World, it's like a whole new wave of Malick. Like he doubled his career in like a quarter of the time, his output.
I know, he became prolific suddenly. It was like the Tree of Life unlocked a creative energy that he hadn't had in a while. Which I can see, I think The Tree of Life was a film that it was like his passion project. He worked on it. It had been in kind of germination for 30 years or something, like in development. So it had been something he had been wanting to make for a long time. He won the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival, which is the highest achievement for a prestige filmmaker, to get. So it was kind of a peak moment for him. It was a personal film for him. Like it was his life story, juxtaposed with the universe, So for Malick, I think it really is his magnum opus. Now that's not to say he doesn't have another one in him. Like I hope he does, but
agreed.
His last three films have definitely not been up to that level at all of The Tree of Life. I think they're great and I love them, but I would love if Terrence Malick directed a commercial for whatever deodorant. Like, I would probably love that. Yeah, I think it ranks for sure as his best film. For me, I go back and forth with The Thin Red Line or The Tree of Life as my favorite Malick film. Obviously, The Thin Red Line has a very personal meaning for me as kind of that turning point, coming of age moment as a film goer, as a film lover. But The Tree of Life as a film, I don't know that there's a better one that I could point to, like, of any film.
No, absolutely, I agree. Whenever the question comes up, like, oh, like, what's your favorite movie, or what are like your top 5 movies of all time? Like, that's kind of an impossible question, but like, I almost like can't deny Tree of Life a place on it because it is so singular. I mean, the only other movie that people typically put it in conversation with is 2001, which is an incredible movie, but it's so sterile and so like absent of the deep things that are like part and parcel of like every frame of the Tree of Life. So they're both grasping at larger things, but coming from two completely different perspectives.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison, the 2001 Tree of Life comparison, and there's interesting trivia with the fact that Douglas Turnbull, who did special effects on the 2001 with Kubrick, he was brought out of retirement by Malick to do some of the visual effects for the Tree of Life. So I think Malick kind of had 2001 in mind a little bit in terms of the cinematic scope of what he wanted the Tree of Life to be. But yeah, I agree. I think they're very different films. There's different energy to them, but both of them have that kind of grandiose like sense of bigger things.
Yeah, completely. I recently saw the IMAX 60 millimeter re-release of 2001, and it was great. But even watching Tree of Life in Trevor's home theater, it's because of the meaning. It is a transcendent film.
Yeah, right. I know. Oh, what I wouldn't give for a 70 millimeter like IMAX release of the Tree of Life. That would be absolutely epic. Someone needs to fund that.
There you go.
That'd be so great.
Chris Nolan's next project.
Yeah, you heard it here first, folks. To get it started.
That's right.
So speaking of the scope of the film, I was just kind of thinking about when we're talking about this film, and we've already said it. He does something that not only does no film really do, but would be almost impossible to pull off, to really see the universe from when A to Z, Big Bang to heat death, in a sense. And why do that? Like, in a sense, like, why you would think that, like, when you talk about matters of faith and pain and suffering, couldn't have he done just a movie, if in the life of the people, without this,
like just on the O'Briens, without the beginning and the end of the world.
And I mean, evolutionary history as well. So what does that add to it, to the grandioseness of the film that would be absent without it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it adds a lot. I think, for one thing, it's a really important part of the Job story. So the fact that the film begins with the Job 38 verse on screen, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, when the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy?" That, I mean, Malick visualizes that idea in the creation sequence. So just at the point where the mom is kind of suffering from her son's death and she's probing God, she's asking these questions that Job asked. It's like God's response of "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" It's like Malick shows that. Like, you don't hear God say that, but you see him laying the foundations of the earth. Like, you see that Job 38 moment when the morning stars sang together. And I think that's what that sequence is about. It's about seeing that big picture of, like, I know your problems are, real, and they seem like everything to your world, but let's pull back. Let's see this big picture. Like, I created all this. I'm in control. I'm sovereign. I've watched this whole narrative of creation, evolution, whatever you want to call it, unfold. And it ends with you. The sequence ends with you and your children, you giving birth to these sons. So I've been there. I've been watching you. So I think narratively, in terms of the emotional place that Malick wants to go with this film, like that sequence is absolutely central. So it's not just about showiness and kind of doing a 2001 Kubrick type, crazy imagery thing. It's a theological meaning to it. He's trying to put the viewer in that Job-like position of this conversation with God. And in the film, God's voice, God's perspective is represented with the forming of the universe, laying the foundations.
Yeah, it's almost as if to really understand meaning in life, which you're gonna want, like when you encounter the pain of life, to get the broadest context possible.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it is the broadest context that is humanly understandable. The boundaries of time itself.
Right.
That's the kind of context you'll need, transcendental context, to really get at meaning in life, to really get at purpose, and be able to find that and cope through suffering. And so it is. It's almost, you're right. It takes you there, and God takes Job there for kind of similar reasons of trust me, like find meaning in me, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. And what I love about the movie, and the more you watch it, the more you pick up on these things, but there's all these connections between like what you see in the creation sequence and like things that show up later in the film. So everything from like the boys, when they're playing in a field, like one of them says, look, it's a dinosaur bone, or lizards, or like different, even like there's weird shots where the boys spill water on a watercolor painting, and it looks like the nebula of the stars forming, so there's these visual connections that Malick is making between the creation kind of macro level and this micro level of this family in Texas in the 50s. And I think he's wanting to communicate it's the same. It's like the same God who did this crazy cosmic stuff is the God who cares about this family and cares about this little boy and his journey and his questions. And I think it's such a beautiful, articulation of that nature of God, of being kind of the author of the universe, and this scary kind of sublime hugeness to God, and the intimacy of a God who is relational and who pursues us and who cares about the goings on of our life. So that's another thing from the film that I think is just so deeply theological and rich.
When you pointed out that part about the watercolor painting that gets the water dropped on it and almost has like this creative mirroring of the nebula, the thought that came to my mind in that moment is image bearer. And I don't know that that's necessarily what Malick was trying to communicate there, but just that idea of there's a special place for these people in God's creation, God's plan, that they do stand at the center of the film for a reason.
Well, the fact that RL, who, may or may not be a Christ figure, but he's a musician, he's playing, throughout the film, he's seen with a guitar, he's an artist, he's a really artistic little boy. And I think the image bearer thing comes through, like, there's a beautiful scene where RL and the father have a duet where, like, I think the dad is playing.
That's
on
one
the
of my
piano,
favorite
and
scenes in the movie.
Yeah. It's such a great scene, but to me it brings to mind this idea of, like, we are created in God's image, and he's a creator and we're creators. And just like the father plays a symphony, so to speak, with this world he's created, like, we're invited to duet with him. We have a creative role to play as well. And I think that's what that scene means to me.
That's very moving. Like, I'm getting moved right now just
I got chills.
thinking back through that scene. Like, we bring our own experience to that. So, like, our relationships with fathers or father figures or authority figures or, like, mentors in the faith, these things all take on various nuances where you can have literally, like, everyone who sees this movie take a little bit of something different, because he is telling the truth as much as possible in those suggestive, evocative ways, not going A, B, C. Here's my systematic theology.
Yeah. The movie can be, in a sense, about you as the viewer in a way that no other movie really can. You almost look in an emotional mirror in the symbols to feel like your relationship with your parents and
your father figure and that kind of stuff.
Which for all the people,
true.
like, I get if it's not your cup of tea, but to say that to dismiss it as either, oh, it's pretentious, or it's just full of himself, or it's a bunch of crap, it is just baffling.
Yeah.
Right. It's what makes me sad about the people who walk out during the creation scenes, because I feel like if you get past that sequence, the film kind of settles into a more approachable register when it,
And it comes alive so much.
Yeah. And like I had my parents watch it in 2011 when it came out, and they're baby boomers, so they grew up in the 50s, probably very similar time that Malick was a kid. And I don't think my parents would have gone to see the film or even have the tolerance to like make it through the first 20 minutes unless unless I wasn't their son forcing them to see it. but once they saw it, they both were just like, wow, that film really did capture, like, in an uncanny way, like what it was like to grow up at that time, and the little mannerisms of the mother and the father and the way they interacted with the kids, really felt true. So yeah, I think there's something for everyone to resonate with. And that's a mark of great art that is so personal and true, which this film is for Malick. I think he was telling a true story of his childhood as he remembered it. And whenever you do that, whenever you like say something that's just utterly true in your own kind of microcosm, like, it's bound to resonate with other people. And that's why I think the best art is the most personal art, because in a weird, ironic way, that when you set out to do something universal, you often fail. Like, it doesn't resonate universally. So when you set out to do something personal and you do it well and you do it true, like, you actually have a universal resonance. And I think that's what's happening with this film with Malick.
Yeah. It's almost like art in a testimonial kind of form, where a self-story connects narratively more to people than just a list of facts or a to-do list or things like that. To tell something that's real and personal and true to life experience, well, other people can fill in the blanks in their own lives and connect with that.
Which I thought was really interesting. I think somebody probably even pointed it out to me, that the groupings of Terrence Malick's films, broadly speaking, you can kind of look at them as almost A and B sides. Just take the two movies at a time, like looking at Tree of Life and To the Wonder together.
Yeah.
From what little we know about Terrence Malick, like, To the Wonder is like very specifically, personally autobiographical to himself, where the Tree of Life is these are like memories and feelings and like things that were true. Like, To the Wonder is like, this was my life and the mistakes I made and the pain that I caused and the pain that I experienced, and me trying to find meaning and redemption, like, through my actual life. So I thought the Tree of Life and To the Wonder is probably, I think, the most interesting Terrence Malick like pairing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think it's so accurate to call To the Wonder a B-side to The Tree of Life. It's definitely of a piece thematically and just personally for him. It's like his childhood and his adult years. Yeah, I mean, his latter two films as well, Night of Cups and Song to Song, are also pretty biographical, but not to the extent that To the Wonder and Tree of Life are. So yeah, someone should write a book about Malick's late career autobiographical period. Maybe that will be me. I don't know.
I hear somebody we know who may or may not be on this podcast is working on that.
I would have to secure an interview with Terrence Malick, and that might be a feat that is unmanageable. We'll see.
You could try out for one of his. You could get an agent. You're out over there. You could get an agent and try to do a walk-on for one of his next projects.
That would be stalking or something. That would be weird.
That'd be deep cover level investigative journalism.
Well, then I definitely don't recommend that on this public program.
Right.
Hey, so there is a scene that I was kind of struggling with, or like thinking through, what does this mean, for a while, probably maybe too long. In the evolutionary sequence, there's this part where this CGI dinosaur comes up, and this other CGI dinosaur kind of sees it, and immediately you get this sense of danger, right? Of the unknown, of the strange, like, approaching. But it's allowed. It's like, okay, we'll see what happens. And the other one definitely is able to exert power in the situation, and like pins the other dinosaur and gets it to a point where next move could kill, and then decides to walk off. And then scene, Terrence Malick. And so there's so much symbol there. It's almost wrong to even say what is going on here, but what, I just wonder what you guys felt in that scene. What was that connecting for you?
The dinosaur scene is notorious in the Tree of Life.
I'll give you my non-professional scholar and then let Brett bring it home here on that one. But for me, with so many things because people know that like I have I had one good friend in Florida, and now in Kansas I have one good friend here that are like actually cinephiles, and like that are, so like people ask me questions about movies sometimes, and like for like the deep and important ones, like I think sometimes the answer is I don't know. Like I don't think that it's like a X equals Y kind of deal, where it's in nature, in the world, there is the weak and there is strong. And again, depending on what your experience, you could say nature grace. The dinosaurs bring you out of it, or at least challenging you. Because if you're like invested in the movie and like in for the experience, you're like, this isn't what I expected, but okay, I'm in. But there's that layer of removal. So like when the kids are running around in packs, when Brad Pitt's in Hong Kong or whatever, they're aggressors. So like it's just a little bit different, because like these are dinosaurs. We don't have context for that. So it's like people can be cruel and people can misuse their power, or people can choose to not. I felt like it was more of a presentation of struggle and power versus like trying to make any sort of statement.
How those themes are almost existent outside of the human condition,
or how they are essential to nature. Period. Exactly. Not just human struggle and conflict. Those are essential to the natural order, creation.
Yeah, no, that's good. I don't have anything brilliant really about that. If anything, I think it falls in the category of what I was saying earlier, kind of resonances between the evolution creation sequence and then what happens later in the film. Like there's a scene later in the film that I think is kind of the parallel scene to the two dinosaurs, where Jack is there's a wounded boy who's like has a burn scar. Do you remember that character in the film?
Yes.
He's one of the neighborhood boys, and he's been injured. So he's weak, just like the injured dinosaur, and I think he would be naturally kind of a outcast or something that the stronger boys would take advantage of. But there's this scene at the end that's kind of it's like the capstone to Jack's redemption, where he just puts a tender hand around this boy's shoulder, and it's like this unexpected embrace of this wounded boy. So when I see that scene, I think, that's kind of the parallel. That's hearkening back to that interchange between the dinosaurs, where everything in nature would say, the strong overpower the weak, and that's as simple as that. But then the reality of grace in the world is that we can actually reach out and comfort and care for the weak. So there's this kind of Christ-like touch between the two boys that is powerful, and that feels like hearkening back to the dinosaur scene. But maybe not. Maybe that's a stretch. But I've seen the film way too many times when I started making parallels like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what good art does.
Yeah.
It's true.
So if you'll bear with me, this might be part and parcel with
we can have final thoughts here with this
old school Christian film analysis, but I'm sure if my dad was listening to this, he would be thinking, okay, we were talking about this as a Christian film, but how is it a Christian film if it's got a portrayal of evolution in it and things like that? And what would you say to someone who's struggling with that question, honestly?
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate question. I think there are plenty of Christians in the world who have different opinions on evolution, and some, I think some Christians are kind of theistic evolutionists who believe that God orchestrated was the initial cause, and then somehow kind of orchestrated the unfolding of evolution and worked through it to bring about his aims. So I would just say that as one thing, that there's lots of faithful Christians who believe that. But also I would say, like, the film isn't about that. Like, it's not a film trying to prove evolution. It's not like Malick is setting out to, like, celebrate Darwin or something in the movie.
Right.
He's not. It's more of a narrative device that he wants to showcase the macro and the history of the universe from birth to death, and the way that he does that is through this condensed kind of narrative arc of stars and the planet and plants forming and cells forming and dinosaurs.
I love the cellular bit. I love that.
It's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's unmistakable that there's a divine artistry creator element. The music tips us off to that. The cinematic liturgy that it feels like it's not a film that's celebrating a naturalistic Big Bang. It's celebrating.
And the entire stage is set with "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" as well.
Right. The epigraph to the film tips us off that this is about God and his interaction with us as his creation. Yeah.
It's almost like allowing the narrative themes and the discourse to set the tone of what it's trying to do in an impressionistic way, rather than like any one single data point.
Right. For sure.
Well, one of the things we typically do here as we're rounding this out on Substantive Cinema, I don't think it'll be quite as necessary on this one, as we're all pretty clear. Instead of maybe would you recommend this movie, why would you recommend this movie, and maybe how, for Tree of Life, why would you recommend this movie, and maybe how would you recommend this movie, especially to a non-cinephile?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it already in the sense of, like, you need to, and the how of it.
Turn your phone off.
To look at it. Yeah, turn your phone off, turn the volume up, like, give it your full attention. Treat it like an art piece. It is a piece of art. It deserves your attention. And I think Malick's films in general are experiential in the sense that you don't want to overanalyze it, like, as you go along. Like, you kind of just want it to happen to you. You want what he's created to just happen in front of you, like, visually, orally, like, just in all of your senses. And so just be open, like, have a posture of openness and let the movie happen to you. And then maybe on another viewing, or just, let it simmer, let it percolate in your mind before you rush to judgment. And I say that about every film. I think as viewers, we're often way too quick to, like, think that we've summarized a film, like, in the 5 minutes after we leave a theater. Like, we think we've got it, and that's just not that's not the way that a good film operates. It should linger with us. It should provoke thought and analysis that sometimes takes a while to develop. So I think that's especially true of The Tree of Life. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I think it's, like I've written about, I think it's the best Christian film of all time. I think it's a masterpiece of liturgical filmmaking from start to finish. It's, to me, a worship experience. And I think for Christian viewers, especially who are open-minded, I think it can be a model and an inspiration for what a new standard for raising the bar for what we can hope for and strive for with making movies that give glory to God and express kind of the beauty of theology and explore interesting questions. So yeah, it's a film I hope, young Christian filmmakers watch. And I know I've shown it at Biola University where I've taught.
Yes.
Yeah. So the next generation of Christian filmmakers, like, I'm so glad they have The Tree of Life to look to. And I hope that there's another Terrence Malick somewhere in college right now who's gonna make the next Tree of Life. So that's my hope.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
Well, maybe they're reading some great articles in Christianity Today, or on the Gospel Coalition, or maybe listening to maybe even this review and getting inspired. So
yeah, maybe.
Well,
Yeah.
Brett, we just wanted to thank you so much for your time. We've appreciated a lot. This is
We're
a
really
movie.
honored.
Absolutely. This is a movie that I love and I know you love, and like you're somebody that I've looked to for a long time as like appreciating what you have to say and your viewpoint on things and your ability to articulate them. So thank you so much for your time here tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure for me to talk about this film and Malick, so you don't have to twist my arm if you want to do
Well,
it
that's
again
true. Well, maybe we
sometime.
can have you on again next time you got a book coming out or something. We'd love to have you back on sometime.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Brett.
Thanks.
Okay, you guys have a good night. Stay warm
You
in
too.
Kansas
Thanks.
City.
Yeah, we'll try.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
So thanks again to Brett McCracken, senior editor at the Gospel Coalition for Arts and Culture. Great honor to have him on.
Absolutely, man. That was great.
We'll be linking to his social media and that most recent article on Terrence Malick's film in the show notes. So
And
make
even
sure to check
probably
that out.
a handful of them. He's written a few. Maybe
Yeah.
we can, depending on how much space we have, put links to several of them.
Throw some stuff in there to give you guys some reading material.
And links for the Tree of Life. If you
Yeah.
guys want to check it out, I know Tree of Life is a movie that the majority of folks probably haven't seen. And hopefully, if this half interview, half review has spurred your interest, which we hope it did.
inner review.
Yikes.
Sorry.
If this episode of Substantive Cinema has piqued your interest in Tree of Life, which we hope it has, we'll have some links to check it out on Amazon and iTunes as well there.
And also in the show notes, you can find the links to our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter.
You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at The Substance Pod, and you can email us at thesubstancepod@gmail.com.
And that is covered by our substance guarantee, which is
Trevor guarantees that he will read every email that comes in, and I guarantee that I might.
you can also hit us up on that phone line, 913-703-3888.
Which
You were the phone cellular type.
last night, did you listen to that voicemail we got?
It's creepy.
So pretty sure one of our non-listeners accidentally sent us a very strange voicemail. If that was a coded message by one of you listeners, please tweet at us so that we actually know what you're saying. But
Please let us know so we can sleep at night again.
that was so creepy. I got that at like 11:45.
Yeah, it was
Man.
pretty awkward. But hey, if one of you guys sent that, then thanks for interacting. Question.
No thanks from Philip, though.
Yeah, yeah. But thank you for listening to this fun episode about the Tree of Life. And give us, if you enjoyed it, scroll down, give us that 5-star rating, and leave a review.
Thanks so much, guys. We are looking forward to seeing you guys next time.
Release the Kraken!